Murder at Midnight. The shocking truth behind Dubai's deadly mystery. What if everything you thought you knew about the truth was a lie? What if you were trapped in a twisted game with no way out? Prepare for a shocking journey that will leave you questioning everything. Stay with us till the end to uncover the dark secrets that have been haunting Tanya and see if she can escape the nightmare that's been waiting for her all along. The night was thick with heat. Dubai's skyline loomed like a jagged silhouette against the dark sky. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Inside the penthouse suite, the silence was deafening. A single light flickered over a polished marble table. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should. Time crawled as if something or someone was waiting. In the corner, a shadow shifted. Tanya froze, her breath caught in her throat. A muffled noise. Was it the wind, or was someone in the room with her? Her heart pounded, ears ringing. She scanned the space. Nothing. But something felt wrong. Something was there. Tanya stepped back, her bare feet whispering against the cold floor. Her hand reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. The lock wasn't right. It hadn't been locked before. She tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. A cold sweat crept down her neck. She turned slowly toward the window. Outside, the city stretched endlessly. But it wasn't the city that held her gaze. It was the reflection in the glass. A figure stood behind her. Frozen, Tanya's skin prickled. Her mouth went dry. The reflection stepped forward, just inches behind her. Her body refused to move. The figure whispered her name. Tanya's heart stopped. She didn't dare turn. The voice, it sounded like Lori. But Lori was dead. Lori had been murdered, stabbed in her own apartment weeks ago. The news had covered every detail. The shock of it had rattled the whole city. And now, Tanya was alone in a locked room, with Lori's voice echoing in her ears. She could feel the presence growing closer. Tanya gasped for air, hands trembling. She reached out for anything. Her fingers brushed a cold metal object on the desk. A knife. She picked it up. The grip was steady now, but she couldn't hear her own thoughts. The figure moved again. She was out of time. The door slammed open behind her. A scream pierced the silence. But it wasn't Tanya's. The scream echoed, sharp and desperate. Tanya whipped around, her pulse racing. But no one was there. The room was empty. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Was it her imagination? Had she heard that scream at all? She stood frozen, knife still clutched in her hand. The door creaked as it swung wide. Tanya didn't dare move. Was it a trick? A cruel joke? She took a hesitant step forward. The air felt colder. Her skin prickled with the unmistakable sense of danger. The walls closed in around her. Something was watching her. She knew it. A sudden chill swept through the room, unnatural. The overhead light flickered once more, then went out. She was plunged into darkness. Her breath was the only sound. The darkness felt alive. A soft whisper floated to her ears. Don't trust anyone. Tanya's hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. The screen lit up, casting a faint glow. She checked the time. It was 12:03 a.m. Lori's murder had happened exactly at midnight. The same time the reflection appeared. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't a coincidence. Something was happening. Something bigger than she could understand. The phone slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor. A shadow moved in the corner. A cold breath brushed against her cheek. She spun, knife raised. Nothing. A figure emerged from the darkness. A woman's silhouette. Lori. Tanya's heart stopped. Lori's eyes were wide with horror. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Tanya's mind raced. How could this be real? How was Lori standing here when she was dead? The figure raised a hand, pointed directly at her, and then everything went black. The room vanished. The city, The night. All of it. Nothing remained but an oppressive silence. Tanya could feel her feet lifting off the floor. A chill swept through her. A whisper, "You're next." The world spun wildly. Tanya's stomach lurched. She couldn't breathe. Darkness surrounded her, thick and suffocating. Her mind screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. Her vision blurred, flickering between moments. A flash of a blood-stained blade, a hand reaching out. A familiar face, or was it? Tanya gasped, the air icy as it filled her lungs. Then, as quickly as it started, the spinning stopped. She was back in the penthouse, but it wasn't the same. The walls were covered in blood. Red streaks marred the once pristine marble. The air was thick with the metallic scent. Her eyes darted around the room. The knife she had been holding was gone. Tanya's fingers trembled, reaching out for the surface of the table. The coldness of it made her flinch. She turned sharply, eyes locking onto the figure standing in the doorway. Lori. But it couldn't be her. Lori was dead. Tanya blinked, her mind struggling to grasp the impossibility. "Help me," the figure whispered, her voice hollow, empty. Tanya's heart pounded. She couldn't look away. The figure stepped forward, each movement too smooth, too deliberate. Her eyes were empty, a deep, dark void where life used to be. Tanya wanted to scream, but no sound came. The air grew colder. The figure reached out, her hand ghostly pale. Tanya staggered back, her pulse racing. "I'm not real." The voice echoed in her mind, piercing through her thoughts. Tanya's chest tightened, a cold sweat coating her skin. "No," she whispered, but it felt like the words were being forced out of her. Lori's form shifted again, melting into something darker, more monstrous. Her face twisted in agony. "Run," the voice hissed, but it was too late. The room trembled. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, swallowing the light. Darkness closed in around her once more. The whispers grew louder, frantic. Tanya reached out, desperate for anything to hold on to, but her fingers brushed only air. Then nothing. The last thing she felt was the cold breath on her neck, and the voice, just before everything went silent. "You were always meant to die." Tanya's world fell into nothingness. Her vision blurred, her body weightless. The cold breath on her neck was like ice, seeping into her very bones. A distant thrum of a heartbeat echoed in the void, but it wasn't hers. It was a pulse that felt wrong. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. Her chest tightened. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped. It was as if her throat had been sealed shut. Panic clawed at her, desperate to escape, but there was no way out. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, like it was crumbling. Everything around her began to fade in and out, flickering between reality and nightmare. Shapes shifted, merging into something unrecognizable. Suddenly, the darkness was split by a blinding flash of light. Tanya was thrown back, her vision adjusting to the new brightness. She gasped for air, her lungs burning. Her eyes blinked rapidly as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. She was no longer in the penthouse. The floor beneath her was damp, the air thick, with the smell of decay. A dim light flickered overhead. The walls were covered in mold, cracks running down the stone like veins. It was an old, forgotten place. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere far off. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest, the overwhelming feeling of dread crashing over her. She didn't know where she was or how she had gotten here, but the silence, it felt alive. Something was watching her. A whisper came from the shadows. "Don't you see?" it hissed. Tanya spun around, but there was nothing. Her breath quickened, the sense of being hunted crawling up her spine. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Everything you know is a lie." Tanya stumbled backward, her mind racing. The voice sounded like Lori's, but it was twisted. Her eyes flicked to the walls, the dark corners of the room. A figure appeared in the shadows. Not Lori. Someone else. Someone far worse. The figure stepped forward, a distorted silhouette, its features hidden by the darkness. Tanya's pulse quickened. Her legs felt weak. She couldn't move. "I've been waiting," the figure whispered. And then the room grew still. The silence was unbearable. Tanya could feel the weight of the figure's gaze pressing down on her. Her heart beat so loud she was sure it would echo forever. "Do you want to know the truth?" The voice was almost a purr. Tanya didn't answer. Her mouth was dry. She could feel the walls closing in. A chill ran through her veins. The figure stepped closer, and she could finally see its face. A twisted mockery of Lori's. Her eyes, wide and empty, stared straight into Tanya's soul. Tanya couldn't look away. She was trapped. The truth was too much to bear. The figure's lips curled into a smile. "You were never meant to escape." Tanya's breath caught in her throat. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she couldn't move. The smile on the figure's face grew wider, more sinister. It stepped closer, the shadows shifting around it like something alive. Tanya's heart raced, the pounding in her ears deafening. Her fingers trembled, reaching for anything to hold onto. But the walls were slick with damp, offering no comfort. The air was thick, suffocating. The figure's voice slithered through the darkness. "You've been chosen, Tanya." The words were ice cold, like a blade pressed against her skin. She shook her head, desperate to deny it. "No, I don't understand." The figure's hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "You will." With a sudden movement, the figure reached out, its hand ghostly pale and cold as death. Tanya recoiled, but it was too late. The hand closed around her wrist, freezing her to the spot. She couldn't break free. A laugh echoed, low and distorted, filling the space. "Do you think Lori was the first?" Tanya's mind raced. What did it mean? Lori's murder, it hadn't been random. She realized then, too late, she had been a part of this twisted game from the start. The figure leaned in close, its face inches from hers. Tanya could feel its breath, foul and cold. "The truth," it whispered. "It's always been you." The weight of those words hit her like a physical blow. Everything, the penthouse, the reflection, the whispers, it all made sense now. She was trapped, not in this place, but in something far darker. The figure stepped back, releasing her wrist. Tanya staggered, her legs giving way beneath her. The room around her shifted again, the walls warping, bending. A sound filled her ears, a low hum, like an electric current running through the air. It was too much. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sensation, but it was useless. When she opened them again, the figure was gone. The walls were still, the air still thick. But now something was different. A door had appeared where there had been none before. It stood ajar, the dark beyond it beckoning. Her heart raced, but she knew there was no choice. Tanya stumbled toward the door, each step heavier than the last. As she crossed the threshold, the silence engulfed her once again, and behind her, the door slammed shut. The truth had been waiting. Tanya's hand trembled as it grazed the cold doorframe. The moment she stepped through, the world seemed to distort again. It felt like she was falling, floating in some endless void. Her breath came in shallow gasps, eyes wide, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The light here was different, harsh, unnaturally bright. She could barely see through the blinding glare. She reached out, her fingers brushing against what felt like stone walls. The texture was rough, like granite, cold and unyielding. She tried to move forward, but it was as if the ground itself was shifting beneath her feet. The hum in the air grew louder. It vibrated through her bones, making her skin crawl. Tanya stopped, her chest tightening. She had the undeniable feeling that she was being watched again. Slowly, she turned in a circle, trying to spot any clue, any hint of where she was. The sound of her breath, ragged and desperate, echoed in the emptiness. And then she saw it, a shadow, moving just out of her reach. Tanya's pulse quickened, the terror surging through her veins. She reached out, but it was gone, slipping between the cracks of reality like smoke. Her mind raced, every instinct screaming for her to run. But there was nowhere to run. "Do you see now?" a voice whispered from the darkness. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, layered together in a cacophony of whispers. Tanya froze. The words felt like they were digging into her brain. "Everything you've ever known, it's all been a lie." The whispers grew louder, filling the space with a terrible pressure. Tanya's head spun, the weight of it threatening to crush her. She stumbled forward, gasping for breath, hands pressed to her ears in a futile attempt to block out the noise. But it wasn't the noise that terrified her. It was the realization that, somehow, she was in the heart of it all. The truth, the deadly game, had always been hers to play. She wasn't just caught in someone else's story. She was the story, the figure from before, the one that had haunted her every step, suddenly reappeared. This time, it was more solid, more real, its face twisted in mockery. "You can't escape what you are," it sneered. Tanya's legs buckled beneath her. The floor beneath her cracked open like glass, splitting wide. There was nowhere to go, nothing left to grasp. The figure's form shimmered, flickering between worlds. And in that moment, Tanya understood. The truth wasn't a secret to be uncovered. It was a curse to live. And now, there was no way out. The ground continued to crumble beneath her, pieces of it vanishing into the darkness, like they were being swallowed by some unseen force. Tanya gasped, her feet struggling to find purchase as the floor shifted, pulling her deeper into the void. Her heart hammered in her chest, her thoughts a blur of panic. The figure loomed closer, its mocking grin never wavering. "You thought you could run from it," it hissed, its voice like ice scraping against metal. Tanya's breath quickened. She pushed herself back, away from the edge of the collapsing floor. But the walls, the air, everything was closing in. There was no escape, no refuge from the unrelenting pressure. She glanced around, her mind frantically searching for something, anything that might help her. Nothing. Her pulse raced as the whispers intensified, almost unbearable now. "You were always meant to fall," the figure said, its eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "We're all part of this. Lori, we're all bound together, tangled in the same web." Tanya staggered, her hands reaching out for support, but there was nothing left. "You're nothing more than a pawn in this twisted game," the figure continued. "And now it's too late." The air thickened, heavy with the weight of those words. Tanya's legs were shaking, her vision blurring as the realization hit her. She wasn't just a part of the story. She was the story. The figure's smile twisted further, almost gloating. It reached out for her again, but this time, Tanya had no strength left to fight it. Her legs gave out entirely, and she collapsed, the ground beneath her disintegrating completely. Her body plummeted into the blackness, weightless, helpless. The only sound was the rush of air, the violent pull of gravity. She tried to scream, but her voice was lost, swallowed by the silence. Time ceased to exist. The fall seemed endless, and then everything stopped. The air went still. The fall had ended, but Tanya couldn't open her eyes. Her body felt detached, as though she were floating, untethered. Slowly, her senses returned, but the world around her was different. Dark, empty. A chill ran down her spine. She could feel someone watching her. A whisper came again, this time soft, like a breath against her ear. You're not alone. Tanya's chest tightened. A cold finger traced down her spine. She turned, desperate to find the source of the voice. But there was no one. And then, the walls of this place began to shift once more. Tanya realized, it wasn't over asterisk. The game had only just begun. The walls around her pulsated with a faint, eerie glow, as if the very structure of this place was alive, breathing. Tanya's heart raced, every instinct screaming to run, but there was nowhere to run to. The shadows grew deeper, darker, pressing in on her from all sides. She could hear her own breath, shallow and quick, echoing in the suffocating silence. The whispers began again, this time clearer, more distinct. You are part of it, they murmured. Part of the game. The truth. It's yours to claim. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, her skin crawling with the sensation of unseen eyes upon her. The temperature dropped sharply, biting into her skin, but there was no escape from the cold. Suddenly, a shape emerged from the shadows, a figure indistinct, shifting between forms. Tanya stumbled back, her throat dry. "Who's there?" she gasped, but the words felt strange on her tongue, as if they didn't belong to her. The figure didn't answer, but instead, it drew closer, its presence suffocating. It was no longer the mockery of Lori, but something darker, something twisted beyond recognition. It had no face, only an outline, a black silhouette filled with shifting, dark shapes. A laugh, low and hollow, echoed through the space. "You still don't understand, do you?" the voice whispered, now all around her, vibrating in her bones. The walls seemed to close in tighter, suffocating her every breath. "You've always been a part of the game, ever since the first moment." Tanya's mind reeled. What did it mean? She could feel herself losing control, the weight of those words pressing her down, smothering her. "No," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breath. "You're the key, Tanya," the voice hissed, growing louder. "You've always been the one who holds the truth and the end." The figure's shadow twisted, contorting into something worse, something more horrific. Tanya closed her eyes, refusing to look at it, but the voice pierced her thoughts. "You want to know the truth? You have no choice but to know." The ground beneath her seemed to tremble, like the entire world was shifting, breaking apart. "You've been chosen because you can never escape. You'll always be part of the story." Her breath came in ragged gasps as the space around her morphed, the edges of reality warping, folding in on themselves. Tanya tried to scream, but no sound came. She was trapped in this space, unable to move, as the voice pressed closer, suffocating her with its weight. "You were always meant to fall." The air went cold, and Tanya felt her body freezing, her skin hardening, as if the very essence of her being was being drained away. The truth, the game, and the ending. The walls around her cracked open, revealing the endless void again. But this time, there was no way out. Nothing left to fight. And then, as the shadows consumed her, the last thing Tanya saw was the face of Lori, or what was left of her. A twisted reflection of her own fate. And then nothing. The void stretched on, endless and suffocating. Tanya's consciousness flickered, like a dim light trying to stay alive against a rising tide of darkness. She couldn't move, couldn't feel, just the weight of nothingness pressing down on her. A slow, steady pulse began to echo through the abyss, faint but unmistakable. It was like the heartbeat of this place. The pulse grew louder, stronger, reverberating through her chest, syncing with the erratic thrum of her own heart. She tried to open her eyes, but it felt as if they were bound shut by invisible chains. Then a strange sensation flooded her, like a tugging, pulling force from deep within her. It was as though something was trying to pull her back to reality, to life. Tanya gasped, the sensation filling her lungs as air rushed in. She was breathing, living, but the world around her hadn't changed. The endless darkness swirled, the walls still closing in, but this time she could feel something beneath her, an anchor, something real. She pushed against the cold, fighting against the pull, desperate to keep herself whole. And then, in the blackness, a flash of light, a single, brilliant spark that shattered the silence. It was a voice. "Wake up." The words were like ice, sharp and cutting through the fog of her thoughts. Her eyes snapped open, but nothing had changed. The darkness, the whispers, the void, it was all still there. But now, there was a faint glow in the distance, something pulling her forward. A whisper, soft but insistent, sliced through the quiet. "Come closer." It was Lori's voice, but it wasn't the Lori she had known. This voice was different, empty, hollow, yet somehow familiar. Tanya's heart pounded. The tug in her chest grew stronger. She had to know what it meant. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed herself toward the glow, her feet moving almost of their own accord. With each step, the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. But the light at the end, just beyond her reach, drove her forward. The air around her buzzed, almost alive, crackling with electricity. And then, as if breaking through the very fabric of this endless night, Tanya stepped into the light. Her eyes burned from the sudden brightness, but when they adjusted, she saw it. The truth, a reflection of herself, but not like any mirror. This reflection was twisted, distorted, like a fragmented version of her, pulling her into itself. Tanya reached out, but the reflection grabbed her hand first, its grip cold and unyielding. "Welcome back," it said, but the voice was not hers. It was Lori's voice, layered with something darker, more haunting. "No," Tanya whispered, shaking her head, her heart racing. This isn't real. It can't be real." The reflection smiled, its face stretching unnaturally. "You've always been part of this," it said again, its voice growing colder, sharper. "You've been here all along." Tanya tried to pull away, but the reflection's grip tightened. Her world shifted again, twisting, bending around her. The light dimmed, the shadows closing in, the heartbeat still thumping louder. And in that final moment, Tanya realized she wasn't trapped in the dark. She was the darkness. Her mind shattered. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't trapped. She was becoming it. The reflection's grip tightened, pulling her closer. Tanya struggled, but her body felt heavy, as if the very air was pushing against her. The heartbeat, steady, relentless, grew louder, now synchronized with her pulse, driving her to the edge of madness. Her thoughts splintered as the world around her dissolved into flashes of faces, places, moments. Lori's face twisted into a grotesque mask of horror. Her own face, a reflection of a twisted reality she couldn't escape. "You thought you could escape it," the reflection whispered, its voice both familiar and alien. "You are the story. You always have been." The shadows twisted, the world folding and reshaping like it was nothing more than a figment of her fractured mind. Everything bled together, reality and nightmare indistinguishable. Her feet left the ground, her body weightless as she was dragged further into the light, further into the dark heart of the truth. "No," she screamed, her voice a raw, broken sound. "I don't want this. I want to leave." But there was no leaving. She could feel it now in her very bones. The web that had ensnared her from the very beginning. The game. The curse. She was the thread, tangled and fraying, but still woven into the dark fabric of this place. The light pulsed, flickering like a dying star, and Tanya realized, with horrifying clarity, that it wasn't light at all. It was fire. The reflection's smile grew wider, its eyes gleaming with an unsettling gleam. "You can't outrun the truth. You never could." The flames began to lick at her skin, hot and searing. Pain ripped through her, but she couldn't pull away. The reflection's grip was like iron, its presence suffocating. Her body trembled, her mind struggling to hold on to something, anything real. And then, in a final rush of panic, she understood. This wasn't just some twisted, endless game. This was her fate. The reflection, her own twisted self, had always been there, waiting for her to unravel. The truth wasn't something to uncover. It was something to become. The fire consumed her, the darkness swallowing her whole. And Tanya was gone, her last breath lost to the void. But the game continued. And somewhere in the endless dark, her story lived on. Tanya awoke, but not in the way she expected. Her body felt light, like she was floating, weightless in a sea of endless black. The air was cold, freezing against her skin, but it wasn't the biting chill of a real environment. It was different, unnatural, suffocating. She tried to move, but her limbs wouldn't respond. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. It was as if she was suspended in time, held in place by something beyond her understanding. And then a voice, soft, almost a whisper, but it sliced through the stillness like a blade. Tanya. The name floated in the air, surrounding her, pressing against her mind. She tried to scream, but nothing came out. The voice continued, steady and eerie. You think this is over, don't you? Her chest tightened, the panic threatening to overwhelm her. She tried to move again, but the pressure around her grew heavier, pulling her back into the depths. The voice grew louder, more insistent. You're part of something much bigger now. She finally managed to gasp, her breath ragged, her mind reeling. No, I won't be part of this anymore. I can't be. But the voice laughed, low and haunting, like a mocking echo. You never had a choice. The game has already started, Tanya. You're just one of many pieces. The darkness around her shifted, a shape forming in the void. The figure appeared again, more solid than before, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. It wasn't Lori. It wasn't anything she recognized, but it was watching her with a terrifying sense of knowing. I told you. You can never escape, the figure whispered, stepping forward. Tanya's pulse raced as she realized, with a sinking feeling, that it was true. There was no escape. The game, whatever it was, had claimed her. And she was its unwilling player, its next victim in a long, twisted chain of fate. She reached out, her hand trembling, but the figure was gone. And in the silence that followed, a single thought pierced her mind. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The darkness began to fade, slowly, like a mist retreating with the first light of dawn. Tanya's body felt heavier, as though gravity itself was reclaiming her. Her limbs began to move again, though stiff and slow, as if she were awakening from a long, forgotten sleep. She blinked, squinting against the dim light that surrounded her. The air felt thick, but not oppressive. It was almost peaceful. She was standing in a small, empty room, bare, save for the soft glow of an old lamp flickering in the corner. The walls were worn, cracked in places, but familiar. Somehow, she knew this place. It wasn't the endless void, nor the twisted nightmare she had just escaped. It felt real. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she took a cautious step forward, the soft whisper of her shoes on the wood the only sound in the stillness. She didn't know where she was, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. Tanya's chest tightened with a strange, bittersweet feeling. She had been through hell and back, more times than she could count. But somehow she had made it. Her heart still beat. Her breath still came in slow, steady breaths. She was alive and free. Her mind wandered back to the figure in the dark, the game, the twisted reflection, the truth. She had been trapped in that endless cycle, caught between the whispers and the shadows. But she wasn't anymore. The weight of the past lifted slowly from her shoulders, like a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying until it was gone. Tanya turned her gaze toward the lamp, watching it flicker once before steadying. She stepped forward, drawn to it like a moth to the flame, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled. Not a smile of triumph, nor relief. It was a quiet smile, one that spoke of peace, of acceptance. The truth had been revealed to her, and now she was free to move on. The light filled the room, warm and gentle, and Tanya took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt the grip of fear loosen. And in the silence that followed, everything faded into nothing. But she was finally at peace. The end.